keep banging on about 22B. Two guys in a van came past and are they going to stop? Is that a 22B? Is that a 20?
Did they say, is it 22B or not 22B?
Well, welcome back to the Evo Podcast, episode 4. This week I am joined by Dickie, Meaden, John Barker, and in what appears to be the guest seat this week, Henry Catchpole. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Stu. Hello.
So let's start, as we often do, with what you've been up to since we last spoke. So I'll start with you, Dickie, because you're looking at me as if you've got something you want to
what
get
have I
out
been
of
up to? Well, no, I was wondering if we could let the cat out of the bag with the Japanese stuff now, or...
I think we can.
Okay, all
Let's
right.
do that
Well, LFA, Lexus, Nismo, Nissan GTR, sort of 2020 model, so the last one, and Impreza 22B. Just those old things. Yeah.
Any good or just...
Well, we'll be touching on that later, won't we? But yeah, awesome things. I've been fortunate enough to drive the Lexus and the 22B before. I'd never driven the Nismo GTR, although I've driven lots of R35s before. 3 totally different characters, but 3 awesome cars, and you see them there parked, and you think, and you know you can drive any one of them. It's so hard to decide. Right, I'm going to go for that. No, I think I'll have that one. They're yeah, not like nothing else. Those cars.
Well, we'll come on to those in a bit. Henry, what have you been up to?
I have been driving, V12 Ferrari, which we're going to talk about as well, the latest one of those. A lot of time in my Clio recently, and Focus WRC as well. I drove one of those not that long ago, which was...
What is this, top trumps of guests?
No pressure.
Which one? The first generation?
First generation, so it's all the little stubby...
Martini.
Yeah, Martini livery. The one where McRae went in for big bucks. And actually looked up the interview that Russell Bolton did with McRae around that time, sort of saying who was the first person that asked you about your big money contract going there, and he described Carlos Sainz in very funny terms, but sort of basically saying he was tight as anything, and he was the first person. And who joined him at Ford next year? It was Carlos Sainz. So yeah,
I feel I've just sort of carried on from the last podcast. We talked about first cars and fun basic cars because I've been on holiday. So I've been in a hire car for 10 days, and it turned out to be I'm always intrigued to know what it's going to be. Yeah, it's a bit of a lottery, isn't it?
Or similar.
Well, it was supposed to be Volkswagen Up or similar, and I ended up with a Fiat Panda, hybrid, which I think, which I think, the Panda. I think we've all had fun in one of those at some time. And this is the latest. I can't remember how much horsepower it's got. It's not very much. But the people in Greece, which is where we're on holiday, they don't drive very quickly anyway. So it's more than acceptable for bimbling around. But it was a 3-cylinder. I say it's hybrid, and the hybrid bit was minimal.
I think I had the same one on New Yorker last year. It's just, is the hybrid actually doing anything at all?
I think all it does is it's got just enough battery charge to do that scale in the dashboard.
Oh, it powers the display.
That's probably about it. But it was interesting because we were talking about what would be your first performance goal. The fact that when you start driving, it doesn't matter what it is because it's a new adventure, isn't it? It's all new to you. But they're quite... To drive a basic car like that, in some ways, is harder than driving something that's really good because the controls are slightly off or not as honed, so you don't get the feedback. And so, it's still a challenge.
Awkwardly placed and stuff like that. I remember teaching myself to heel and toe in my mother's Mark III Golf 1.4 GL, where the pedals seemed to have, you basically fit a foot between the pedals. And I reckon if you could heel and toe in that, you're sorted basically, because you're never going to find it more difficult than anything else. So
yeah.
Is that why you're pigeon-toed now?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Flipper feet, catchpole.
Ironic given I can't swim, but yeah.
Was the hire car on winter tyres because you're in a hot climate, so it has to be?
No, but the roads were pretty greasy and it.
Hey, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Where do you go on holiday again?
Crete.
Oh.
but when it rains, because they have wall-to-wall sunshine, when it rains, you look at the speed limits and it says 70 k's, say. In rain, 40. You think, what? But gosh, when it rains, those roads are so
Polished.
slippery, so slippery. But yeah, and it doesn't matter. I'll have fun driving anything, so it never really matters what you.
You've never hired an MG HS, have you?
Oh, what?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said when I walked up to it when I went on holiday this summer. Someone asked me on Auto Express, what was it like? And it was like, well, you'd have to write the review as you were driving because it was so forgettable.
Really?
The only thing you can remember is it was a hire car, so there was at least 15 degrees of steering angle when you're going straight.
Which country was this?
This was Italy. It was on winter tyres, which is always good when it's 40 degrees. Never change Italy or Avis. What else? But I can't remember. It's white.
Was this the sort of SUV?
It's kind of an SUV thing, like a Rover Streetwise, I guess, but with but shaped like an SUV. But clearly
Sounds appalling.
Yeah, just a jacked up hatchback. I thought it had loads of room in the back because the way the seats were done, but no, it's just the passenger seat wouldn't go any further back, and it was always at the front. But yeah, totally forgettable. I think it was petrol. I hope it was because that's what I put in it.
So it was memorable for being totally forgettable.
Basically, yeah. Let's move away from rubbish hire cars and go back to Dickie of what he was been driving. So we're going to talk about Japanese performance cars. And are Europeans too snobby when it comes to Japanese performance cars?
Almost certainly yes, aren't they?
Well, I think so. We were having a little chat just before we came in here, and there is a little sense that the older ones of us know where Japanese cars have come from. And as Dickie said, it's a little bit like Chinese cars now. They're establishing themselves. There's a lot of copying goes on. They're doing what the Europeans are doing to get a foothold in the market. Maybe a little bit less with electric cars because China's probably cracking on.
They're leading the way with those, aren't
they?
Yeah.
But if you look back to Japanese cars, the early ones that they sold in this country, I can remember seeing in the 70s, a Mitsubishi Lancer on the street, obviously brand new because the family were all looking around it, and I stopped and had a look as well. And essentially it was no more advanced than the Ford Escort of the day, live axle and all that, but it was slightly fancy, and you got a lot of car for your money, and they were establishing themselves in the market. So we know where they've come from, and they didn't really have a sort of a cult car to hang your enthusiasm on in this country.
I think they followed their motorcycle industry though, didn't they? But I think whenever I go to Japan, it's like one of the most kind of foreign places you can be, isn't it? Brilliant and amazing and exciting, but you get off the plane and it's like, wow, I have no idea how this place works.
You feel instantly lost, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But their motorbikes came over and they copied British motorbikes, and then they eventually took over the But motorcycles around the world are all the same, aren't they? But Japanese cars are quite market specific, so they've always remained do their own thing, slightly odd left field things, whereas the motorbikes are acknowledged as being, they're world leaders, aren't they? And they're amongst the most desirable superbikes you can buy, or motocross bikes you can buy, or whatever they are. And the cars they've always had a cult following, but they've never been celebrated like a Ferrari or a Porsche, which I find quite odd. I catch myself doing it, actually, even though I've driven lots of them. But when you get into them, there's absolutely nothing like them. Much like the country, they're brilliant things.
And they are. As a country, they're very enthusiastic about cars, aren't they? And because they collect all the best cars from around the world. A lot of them go to Japan, so they appreciate great cars.
Look after them beautifully as well.
Yeah, but the ones they produce, they started copying, but now they've found their, probably late 80s, early 90s, they found their groove, and they started to do things their own way.
And nobody's really copying them, because I don't think European manufacturers would know they wouldn't know where the ideas come from. I guess because we've got a longer tradition of, Porsche with flat 4, flat 6 engines, and Ferrari with V12 engines, and they've had that path for 75, 80 years or more, haven't they? So, and Japanese manufacturers, you've said, have only recently discovered their own traditions, haven't they, or recognised them as their own identity.
Yeah. In terms of the snobbery, do you think it was a wider market thing as well outside cars, the sort of made in Japan thing that just wasn't, in the same way now made in China is not seen as something, whereas now we don't have that with goods. If anything, it's
I think it's like cameras, isn't it, or hi-fi. You buy something that's made in Japan and that's the gold standard in lots of industries, isn't it? But
there was definitely a stigma attached to all sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely right.
But the cars came. They've always, as your point when you saw your first Mitsubishi Lancer, but they, we were talking earlier that there was always cars. The 240Z, was a fantastic looking sort of front engine sports car.
But that owed a lot to 60s sports car design generally, hadn't it? Straight six engine and those proportions, and it was their version of it, probably more affordable and doubtless a lot more reliable than a British sports car of the day. But they didn't have their own identity, whereas now they're unmistakable, aren't they? Whenever you see a Japanese car, they're proudly individual and they don't need to follow anyone else's blueprint, I don't think.
Probably the first car that crept out was Godzilla, wasn't it? The Skyline. That sort of...
That was their real period, wasn't it? With late 80s, I suppose, into early 90s, with MX-5 as a little sports car, LS400 Lexus as a luxury car, NSX as a sports car, stroke supercar, and the GTR was their... That was the thing that they did on their own, wasn't it? It wasn't trying to mimic anything else, or it was just trying to beat everything else in their own way.
Yeah, and I think it was probably crept into Australia first, didn't it? And
as a race car, I think that outside of their own racing,
beating everything at Bathurst and all that. So.
Yeah, it was setting the standard, wasn't it? And as you say, each manufacturer had a sports car or a driver's car, whether it was Mark 1 MR2 or Honda CRX. They all had a sports car in their range, but it wasn't something that defined them as a brand. There was more worthy cars that they were trading on, but it was the R32, wasn't it? The Godzilla sort of era, and it's beating the Australians in its backyard. It was getting onto the European radar. It was starting to appear at the Nürburgring and in Germany, and it became those that knew, but there was still very much even in when that was happening, it was people were European car fans, Porsche, Ferrari, Lotus, TVR. But the Japanese were coming in with really compelling technology-led RX-7s, GTRs, NSX, Prelude, all these cars with technology on that now is manufacturers we're having it rammed down our throats, four-wheel steering and rear axle steering, and Prelude was doing that late 80s, early 90s, wasn't it?
They probably went too far too soon, because I suppose if you look back from a Ford Sierra, say, that was this weird aerodynamic looking thing, but it was really just like a Cortina underneath, wasn't it? So the engineering was very old school and conventional, and nothing really changed very much. And then I'm sure if you got into the equivalent Honda or Toyota or something, it would feel polished, so different that it would be like, I'm not sure I like this very much. And I think cars are more homogenous now, and the technology is more evenly spread, so then the character of each country comes out. And I think Japanese cars it's no longer an issue, is it? It's no longer a factor. You're drawn to the fact it's Japanese because it's something a bit different and a different flavour.
We didn't get the 240Z here, did we? But it was massive in America.
I can't remember if we did or not.
I don't think it was certainly nothing like the car.
It was a massive seller in the States, certainly.
And I wondered if that had been a bigger thing here, whether actually we'd have, because it's such a cool thing, looked great.
We certainly had the 280, which, it had a massive...
Yeah, and 260 and 280, wasn't it? And then they went to +2+2, didn't they? So they're a bit like E-Types, they got a bit ungainly looking.
And then they brought out the 300ZX, which again is this probably the dawn of performance cars in the UK from Japan, in that we had that 300ZX, we had the NSX, You could get grey import Skyline R32, and suddenly all of this stuff was credible in terms of what it did and different.
And then we didn't really want to acknowledge it, probably, that it was actually, you know, in some cases as good or sometimes better than what we were doing.
I went on the launch of the NSX in the early 90s, and obviously they benchmarked. And obviously one of the cars they must have benchmarked was the 348, which was not a great Ferrari. And that was a massive wake-up call for Ferrari. Yeah. Because there was this car that was mid-engined, V6. The dynamics had been honed. They were very keen to tell us in the press conference, honed so that anybody could handle it. So, yeah. So this, you know, the yaw characteristics of this mid-engine car had been honed so that it wouldn't catch anybody out.
And it had luggage space, didn't it? And it was properly built and all the things that...
Yeah, and light and very approachable with a fantastic gear shift as well.
Aluminium construction.
Yeah, so it was all very progressive stuff. And the 348, which had been a pretty average Ferrari, was suddenly looked like a really, you know, really sad thing. And that prompted Ferrari to go and do the 355.
Yeah. Also, Porsche at the time, it was 993, which was just an evolution of 964, which was an evolution of 32 Carrera. So it did make those already established European manufacturers sort of push themselves, and you know, both Ferrari and Porsche's case, have to invest huge sums of money to answer this threat that was coming from Japan, because it was, I think, NSX was the car that more people were aware of, and it branched out of being a niche car to, I might consider one of those, because I am fed up of a 911 where the glove box is over there, or a Ferrari where it doesn't work, or you can't use it in tricky conditions and stuff. And it made the European legacy manufacturers sort of push themselves more, I think.
The other thing I was thinking about in terms of whether the sort of stigma and the snobbery kind of went away was something about the whole arcade games and everything that came at Ridge Racer, all that. I think of those sort of late 80s, and even if that they themselves didn't at the time make the cars more acceptable, the people that were playing them and then grew up and gradually, you know, the decade later after they came out, and suddenly they don't have the same.
No, they're just cool. They're just cool, exciting cars, aren't they?
Them on, you know, whatever it was, the consoles, and that then sort of feeds into the whole sort of thing in terms of actually looking at them with a different view, because they've been grown up playing these things from Nintendo or whatever.
I mean, Honda were winning in Formula One as well, weren't they? Yeah.
It was a combination then of the arcade games, the games consoles, and motorsport that lifted the snobbery blanket off.
Also, I was going to say at some point.
But also reliability. They got a reputation for building stuff.
And Le Mans, actually. Yeah. 70s, 80s, 90s, they were massively into Le Mans.
Is this where you mentioned you've driven 7, 17?
Again.
Yeah, I was going to say that till later. But, I think most other nations stay in their lane, don't they? America builds trucks and, you know, big muscle cars and stuff. We build sports cars and luxury cars. Japanese do everything. I think that's the intriguing thing about what they do.
Yeah, the first Lexus LS400, which was obviously a Mercedes, but made by Toyota.
Yeah,
and it's a remarkable car in terms of refinement. Not our sort of car, but when they go for something, they shoot for it, and they generally do pretty damn well.
So the NSX was a car that made Europe sort of wake up in Impreza. What else are we? I think GTR is, particularly R35 R34 was the first officially imported. That was very low numbers, wasn't it? But R35 was 07, 08, I think, when the establishment took notice and went, "Oh, hang on a minute, we've got a challenger here."
Like all of them, it was this particularly GTR, but it was that performance democratized to a certain degree, even if they were rare or whatever. Sort of, it was offering
sub £60,000, wasn't it? A GTR when it was launched.
But the thing about the GTR, and I can imagine you describing the 3 cars parked up that were in this month's test.
Yeah.
The GTR is still a strange thing of its own
I love it, but it's weird. It's a
strange
it's a
car,
bizarre.
It has been since the very first R32. That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And it's that the one that you drove, the Nismo, is actually, if you turn the damping up to its firmest, it really makes sense. If it's trying to be a comfort car, it doesn't work.
Comfort's the worst mode.
Yeah,
the wheels are all
got
over the place, and it's just they're definitely
not
punishing you for going the wrong way with
you have to go.
setting, aren't they? But
you have to go for it.
There's such a hardcore car.
That R35 was the first time I ever went to Japan.
Yeah.
And I always remember that launch because it was Jethro was meant to be going on it. And then, exactly. Sorry, I said this silly joke. And with about 4 hours to the flight taking off, called me and said, "Have you got your passport?" And I was still pretty junior at the time. And so I suddenly found myself on this flight to Japan. And it was, like you say, you arrive there and it's suddenly just...
It's the coolest place.
Bizarre, sort
quite
of
scary
world.
the first time you turn up, but it's
we went to Sendai Highland Raceway, is where they launched it, which is it was next to a theme park, and it was all a little bit dilapidated, but amazing sort of kind of huge elevation changes, and then the road route out, which I was in the car on my own, so I was still trying to desperately look at this strange sat nav and work out where I'm going to go.
If you get lost, you'll never be found again, kind of feeling. Yeah.
And I remember coming back towards the circuit and thinking, I need a bit more time in the car. So I thought, that's where the start of the route was, and that was really good. So I turned off there, and I was spotted by some guys from the launch in this little van who saw me go what they thought was the wrong way, because obviously you were meant to stick absolutely rigidly to this route, and I was going off piste. So they gave chase. And I just took off, and they were out of sight within about 2 corners, and then I thought, I'll turn around. Sure enough, I came back the other way, and they were hammering along this little van, the comedy on its nose, since they saw me going back the other way again. And I had to stay up all that night and write the cover story, file it.
That's why Jethro didn't want to go.
Because by the time I landed, issue gone to press.
The thing is that obsessive way of engineering really does come through in some of the cars. You look at the latest Honda Civic Type R.
Civic Type R is
it's
a front wheel drive GTR.
Brilliant example of them absolutely nailing that car in so many important respects, and it's extraordinary.
Every single thing that they just ran out of time, but they knew they would have done it if they had the time.
Yeah.
It's like, go on then, lads, have one more go, and you can.
It's why the LFA was in development for so long.
Well, it completely changed, didn't it? It was aluminium construction, and then they decided it needed to be carbon fibre. It was a ridiculous project, but an amazing project. I can't imagine any other company doing that.
Piek, who've probably done the same sort of thing, possibly.
But not with the same. I know he was notoriously quite a possibly strange, obsessive individual, but
that result, his mindset resulted in things like Chirons, isn't it?
We get the Veyron, which is like it's an awesome thing, but it's a bit of a passionless kind of.
And we got the Phaeton as well, which is it's like your hire car. Just can't remember anything about it once you step out of it.
More comfortable, I imagine.
I have a bit of a weird crush on the. I have to say.
That's
12-cylinder Phaeton.
You could dream of W8 Passats next.
Yeah, well, don't get me going, Stuart.
So the other car in that test was 22B as well, so it brings us back to Imprezas, because that was the pinnacle, wasn't it? You busted a gut to get it in the first issue of Evo, and you've driven a couple of examples since. But that was a mega car up on the North York Moors, wasn't it? It
was born for those roads, wasn't it? It just
for all the greatness of that LFA engine and the GTR that can just seem to do anything and everything everywhere. But the 22B was it's just the right size, isn't it? And it's the right amount of performance, and it just looks so cool.
It's so evocative, isn't it? Yeah, you see. I know it's a cliche now, isn't it? Blue and gold, but it still, whenever you see it, particularly that shape, it's just like, oh my god, that's just like little now, sort of chubby little 17-inch wheels and slightly more, sort of rally car-esque, slightly breezier ride height, and it just looked just right. And the amount of performance it has is, it's a very fast car point to point, but it's all kind of compressed into sub 3-digit speed, so you can be having a brilliant time, and it works with the road. It doesn't kind of ignore it, but it doesn't get deflected by it either. So you just
when it came out, everyone said it was too stiff, didn't they? Which was kind of it was one of those things. I remember driving it for
it's just the perfect car from that period, isn't it? I think, and the heartbreaking thing is the values of the things are just nuts.
Should have bought one.
I know, and that's we should know this stuff.
They were never cheap.
No.
But they were like 25 grand, which is, we should know this stuff, shouldn't we? We should have barnfuls of these
but we
cars.
don't back ourselves with this, do we?
But I think that's, again, it's possibly the slight snobbery again, isn't it? So, I wouldn't spend that much on an Impreza. And then you look at them now, and it's hard to imagine a car you'd want to open the garage door on more, really.
Particularly today, isn't it? Because it's, well, just to the point you made, its performance is all at a level that doesn't make you stand out. And you can have the most amazing time, but you're not doing silly speeds. And
it's one of those cars that's grippy, like lots of traction, lots of grip, but the grip starts to yield quite soon. So it's not just like the GTR is the opposite. Still super exciting for all of its own reasons, but the 22B is just so good.
And it had that such lovely balance as well, didn't it? It was just different to other Imprezas, just that bit more aggressive.
You can play around with the diff a little bit, which I know you could do with the non-wide body 2-door, but that car with that engine as well, I think it's just a small increase in capacity, and it wasn't quite as frantic, but I think it was still free revving enough, and it just has a bit more oomph. And we criticised the short gearing as well, because it was first, second, third, fourth, and then fifth. And the UK car, they tried to play around with the gearing a little bit, but I think now if you were to drive them, you'd want the
intensity of the experience,
because it works so well.
Oh, it's just so I think because today we're brought up on sort of such intergalactic speeds that you can achieve very quickly in modern stuff without much effort, but the fact you're changing gear so often, but you're not going that fast, but you're going fast enough to enjoy the car and to enjoy the road.
It just sounds really good, and it's got a really nice, like very particular little snickety gear shift. You can hear it as well as feel it. I don't know. But it's such a simple, basic, quite a humble car, I think.
Even weirdly, this is really key, but like the indicator stalks and stuff have that particular very sharp click clack sort of plastic, but they're perfect in terms of actually sort of like high beam to low beam. It's so fast and quick, and so it's
everything's there, isn't it?
Of kind of that you jump into modern cars and it seems to take an age for anything
to
actually react or kind of do anything. It's like that's all you need.
Yeah, it's proper haptic. You feel it. It's not. Is that on? Is that off?
Click. Yeah.
Keep banging on about 22B, but I was in the Nismo, so this big white sort of brutal looking car with Aston doing some pictures, and behind us was, I don't know whether you were in the 22B or whether James was in the 22B, I can't remember, but
depends what we were doing.
Two guys in a van or a car came past, and are they going to stop? They did, reverse back up, and they walked up to us in the Nissan, had nothing to say about the Nissan at all. Is that a 22B? Is that a 22B? And we're like, well, yeah, go on. It's like, fine. Don't ask us about the Nissan.
They say, is it 22B or not 22B?
But yeah, it's just it still has. I mean, North Yorkshire is sort of rally country anyway, isn't it? So they would have gone through there in the 90s. But it's still such a powerful combination, I think, that car.
It sounds like you can talk about this all day. Thankfully, you've written 3,000 words about it.
I've written that one as well, Stu.
I know you have 2 bits of copying 3 days before deadline, making me feel bad about
it's the other 2 bits of copy that I still need to write.
So let's we'll draw that conversation to a close and have a break. Go and get a cup of tea, favourite biscuit, or whatever else you have, coffee or peanut butter, and God knows what you'll have, John. And we will see you after the break.
It wasn't just that George got a great price when he sold his old car on CarWow, and it wasn't that he was able to compare prices on his new car, but it was the USB sockets in the back for the kids' devices, which left George to enjoy silence. That made this car change life-changing. Car change? CarWow. Visit carwow.com/verify for details. T's and C's apply.
Welcome back to the second half of episode 4. You've just heard us talk a lot about Japanese cars. We're now going to back into Europe and V12 Ferraris, which Henry had been driving recently. Although before we get on to that, John did have in his break peanut butter and a jammy Dodger. So yeah,
You said you wouldn't tell anybody.
well, it was just stuck on my mind. I had to get it out there, John. Anyway, V12 Ferraris, Henry, and you can pronounce what its name is.
I probably can't.
You
It's
can have a
it's
try.
kind of- I'm going to Duodici Cilindri, I think.
Ooh, that's good.
Is that right?
It's not
Yeah.
bad, yeah.
Yeah.
No idea whether it's right or not, but it sounded good to us.
Whatever you do, you mustn't call it the 12C. So obviously not when you're near working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a bit of resonance there, isn't there?
It is like, so I think the way I describe it is it's kind of, it hasn't moved forwards a great deal because obviously Ferrari's battling like other manufacturers' legislation and stuff. So actually just keeping that naturally aspirated engine alive is the kind of achievement in itself. So you look at the numbers and it's not a massive leap or anything. It's 30 brake horsepower more than the 812, but it's the same as the Competizione before, and a lot of the internals like the titanium conrods we've seen in the Competizione. So a lot of it is about just preserving that engine, and it feels like that's why they've named it after it, to sort of, it's like, look what we've done, it's still here, we've kind of been able to keep it going. To that extent, it is quieter as well. It's
Quieter than an 812 or
yeah,
yeah,
definitely. It's,
inside and out.
So I didn't hear it outside really, but because I was always driving it, but it's definitely quieter inside. Still, the strange thing is, you could sort of think the sound that makes obviously has such an impact on the way you view the engine, and actually it's obviously still every bit as rabid as before. Yeah. The gearbox is 30% faster in its shifts, and the ratios are 5% shorter. So it's doing everything as before. It's all there, but you've just got slightly less drama because this lack of noise again because of the legislation. And it's therefore, I think that Ferrari obviously knows this, and I think they've changed the whole character of the car just slightly. They've, interestingly, then they talked a lot about the design, which, regardless of whether you like it or not, it certainly looked very striking out on the road. We know Ferrari's press pictures are never the greatest, but you see it amongst other traffic. It looks not just retro, because obviously it's 356 GTB4 front end, reminiscent, but it does look pretty futuristic as well, because you've got these big sort of clean surfaces and stuff. So it's a cool, it's a very striking looking thing. But they've said that the style aligns it more with the Roma, whereas before, when you look back at sort of F12 and 812, they were very much seen as the performance variants. They were the top of the tree. They were given out as
I've
the
always
highest
found them
performance,
slightly awkward.
which is,
they never look as, like, the engine's always been, as you said,
Yeah.
absolute monster of a thing. But the cars never quite look that extreme to me somehow. This maybe looks more striking, but sounds like it's
more, I think, the
less dominant in the
I think
car.
it's that form function ratio kind of has gone. It feels like styling partner's been given perhaps a bit more leeway with it than previously perhaps, but they've aligned it definitely with the Roma, which I think says as much about it. Performance isn't the greatest thing. I asked in the press conference, had they got a lap time around Fiorano, which feels like a very sort of, not just because I don't really care about lap time around Fiorano particularly, but I just wanted to see what they were going to say, because clearly it wasn't in all the
Well, that's always been a Ferrari thing for years,
and
hasn't it?
it's just have all of them sitting up there, and it's sort of who's going to have the microphone to sort of answer that one, and all they'd say is it is faster, but we're not quoting a lap time.
So they're trying
because
to
it's not,
manage your expectations.
They're saying it's not performance is not the outright thing with this car, and I think it does feel just a little bit more GT. It's just a tiny bit softer.
Does
If you
that make it a
haven't driven one
nicer
before-
car, though, do you think? I would say it possibly does, doesn't it?
Potentially, it depends entirely, I suppose, on your. You do miss a bit of that sound. I think that is the thing that you do if you've got a Ferrari V12.
It's harder and harder, though, isn't it? Because they've sort of got a pot of noise, haven't they? So you can either have grippier tyres, or more aggressive tyre, but they generate more noise. Yeah. But then you've got less engine noise to play with. It must be
I'm
horrible.
Sure a Krapovich has got to be rubbing
Well,
its
quite,
collective
all the
hands.
aftermarket.
But it must also leave them open, or not leave them open, but whatever the Competizione or the TDF or version allows them to perhaps go further than they have done in the past, because an 812 Superfast felt like a very special thing. It was the noise, how it drove, the performance it delivers. If they've sort of softened it or wound it back, or not gone as far as you would expect from. It does allow the special one to be even more special, I guess. Is there much room, though, on the engine side? Because if it's noise and emissions...
Well, I wonder if they just skip the sort of the next one. They don't do a road-registered like Competizione. They just go they put it into the XX program or something like that and actually go, well, most people are going to drive this on tracks. Why don't we just do a totally unhinged version that's not road-registered?
Although they have just done an XX that... isn't a track.
So they've got the lines already. So exactly. They might do that, I suppose.
Yeah.
And you can also, I suppose, it's strange as well because you can tailor the interior, which is definitely not my favourite part of the car because it just doesn't have any of the cleanliness of the exterior at all.
Yeah.
But they've got two options of seats, so you can have the more racy Sabelt seats, but I don't think that would necessarily fit.
Were all the cars externally, they all look like they were spec the same from the photos. Were they all the same inside?
They were all the same inside as well. I would say from what I saw, they all had that.
Did they have any sort of? I think the F8 had a resonator, didn't it, which delivered more noise to the cockpit.
Yeah, so because the F8 had sort of channeled the sound from the exhaust side, so this had special resonators, tuned resonators from the induction side into the cabin. So saying one of the things they have, or the problems they have with the engine is obviously that most of their cars you can dampen it at the exhaust side, whereas so much of their noise in terms of the decibels they're required to get is from the induction side. So they've tried to channel that. I think as James said, it's kind of the noble noises, it sounds like noble gases, into the cabin. Does it work?
Can you turn it on and off? Or is it just there working all the time?
I think it's working all the
and it doesn't change with the dynamic modes.
Doesn't seem to. No.
It's sounds a little bit of a shame because that engine.
Well, it's a massive shame, isn't it? With that engine.
That on paper, it's epic, isn't it?
Yeah.
9,250 RPM.
9,500 actually at the limiter. So
that's the
limiter.
limiter.
Power's at
Peak
9,250. Yeah.
But how much is the engine benefiting as a better engine because they've had to do it for emissions, so therefore they've had to use lighter materials, better materials.
The two go hand in hand, don't they? You improve the efficiency, i.e. reduce the emissions, you increase the performance. The two things are connected.
It's say the performance hasn't taken a huge leap on. It's actually got less torque than the Superfast and the Competizione, not by much, but fractionally. And the big challenge, so sitting next to the head of powertrains at dinner, and it is just the case of, they get the new regulations, the particulate filter, the catalytic converter, they've got their thicker coatings on them, so you're just working on getting the breathing better in the engine, working on the efficiency to just stay where you are, basically, because I think Ferrari doesn't want to release an engine that is less powerful than before. So it's all a case of just trying to...
Was there any mention of hybrid?
No.
No, I think they've said with that V12, isn't it? It will stay as it is for as long as they can build it, and in markets where the customers are, and hybrid is V6 and V8 going forward. And I think if they were to do a hybrid, they would start with a new V12 surely, because that engine is now, you can trace its roots back a long way, can't it?
Do you think it's getting close to a point though, if you can't enjoy the character of V12 in the expressive noise it makes in the car and outside the car, it gets to a point where, not that there's no point,
Is it
I'm
worth
sure,
it?
but I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
we'd miss it if they didn't make them. But
Yeah.
if you've just got this epic kind of propulsion system that's making this more of a turbine. I mean, a 550 Maranello
and it's not doing
was
that.
more
And it's
like
kind of,
that.
and it is
but
one of those things. It still sounds really good. You just know
What
what
it
could have had.
what it has been.
Yeah,
It's
what
sort
it
of,
could have had. Ironically, there's less that you can do with a naturally aspirated engine in terms of working with the emissions test than with a turbo. You got much more option with turbo to lean things off and tweak what's coming out the exhaust. So I think they deserve all the credit for keeping a mega engine going. But it does sound like it will be left to the aftermarket to give it its voice,
I think so.
which why they still can do that either. It's just so,
Going to be quite a year for V12s, isn't it? Because Vanquish is a couple of weeks' time, I think we drive that. But a very different approach that Aston Martin seem to take with the Vanquish. They want it to compete with Ferrari, but they will also go down their own path with the character, which of course at that top of the market, you're always going to have your own, the character always shines through a lot more. But it sounds like the Ferraris come a little bit closer to what the big Astons always are, slightly sort of more, less hairy, scary, and a little bit more refined, a little bit easier.
Yeah, because it's really not huge,
but you notice it.
It's but you do just
if you've got that.
just notice.
I love them, but I have always struggled with the F12 and super fast, and because it's just unnecessarily fast. It's like you don't. Whenever I drive one, I can't imagine owning one, and
I'd love to own an F12.
But
F12
perhaps
is just it's just that unhinged kind of.
yeah,
it's
but
like
perhaps
big-
in my head, I imagine a V12 Ferrari as being more of a sort of long distance car, and whenever I've driven one on track, they're so nuts that you'd literally need a lorry full of tyres because you'd shred them in 2 laps. So I never quite. I love it for what it is and that they can do it, but I don't know what I would do with all of that performance in that package.
So for you, the older V12 Ferraris are your preference. Is there a point where
I don't know whether
599 or
I'm sure if I got in a 550 or something, I'd love it, but it's literally, it's not quite half the power, but it might as well be, mightn't it? They were always quite relaxed, like super. I love the sense of a really big, smooth, elastic,
so smooth,
brilliant.
Yeah.
Like that to me is there's 2 distinct routes you can take with a V12, aren't there? There's that, or Ferrari happen to have done both in the last 25, 30 years. But as a thing to live with and use, I think it got in the way of like an FF or something. That engine seemed quite a bit too
gritty,
busy for that kind of car.
Yeah.
So I do love the old school. I probably read too many old Mel Nichols car magazine stories, but put it in top gear from walking pace and it goes right around to its maximum speed. That always amazed me as a kid, and I think it probably still does now whenever I drive something like that.
Was it a 550 or the 575 early issue of Evo? We took all the Subarus and things to my road.
That's 550.
Yeah.
Britain's best drivers
Reading
car.
Yeah. And there was Imprezas and
because it was P1 versus 550 you took.
And
306.
But that 550 was remarkable on the wet handling circuit. It was properly competitive, and it was very drivable.
Yeah.
So it did do the cruising thing.
So was it F12 where they went bats?
Yeah.
The F12 had a reputation for being quite edgy, didn't it?
599 was much bigger, wasn't it? And it was
Yeah.
much more aggressive because it had the Enzo engine and it had at the time, it was like, wow, this gearbox is amazing. So it was I'm sure if you went rewound, it's still going to be an impressive car, but the gearbox will date it. But that was a really big step, I think, because we drove Harry's 550 out to do the 599 launch, and they were completely different beasts, really.
599 GTO against LFA as well. That was the GTO was the first time that they started to add almost a model range, isn't it? Into you had the 599 and then you had the
they'd
GTO.
applied the sort of Scuderia Speciale type treatment to that car. That V12 was, again, that was like bloody hell. They're really kind of finding amazing performance out of it, and it made the LFA feel quite limp. We took it to Bruntingthorpe, which is a
Jaguar Land Rover storage facility.
It's a parking facility now, but it was an old Cold War airbase for those of you that don't know what it was. A big long runway,
lots of space, nothing to hit.
Exactly, yeah. But we had LFA, which we could figure, and the 599 GTO, which we could figure, and the GTO was so fast, and it would keep going like 150, 160, 170. It would just keep going, and the LFA started to struggle a little bit beyond 160, 170. It would get there, but it just didn't have this rampant kind of performance.
But that engine compared to the one that followed it was just nuts. That Enzo engine was incredible.
What's the horsepower of the LFA?
5. I should know this, shouldn't I? 552 or something. Right. So it wasn't.
599 was only just north of 600.
Yeah, it had more capacity, so it had more torque. Yeah. The LFA is amazing. You say about the revs of the Ferrari, the way an LFA revs. I know famously it had to have a digital tacho because a conventional one wouldn't move. It's like half a second from idle to 9,500 revs. So it's a tiny little engine. I think it's the size of a V8 and the weight of a V6 or something wild that they did to achieve that. And it has more nuance, I think, the LFA, but it didn't have the guts of the 500. Didn't have the performance, but the performance the LFA had was much more. You were much more prepared to use it and enjoy it on the road. GTO's a bit of I always found it a bit of a flick knife of a thing, really.
It is remarkable. That
You've got
engine.
A list of figures there.
Well, I just looked at the peak figure, naturally aspirated, because obviously there was a KERS for the FXX Evos and things like that. The peak one was the Enzo, which is pretty neat. 848 horsepower at 9,500 RPM, which is 135 bhp per litre, which is mega. Yeah. And it's 6+ litres.
You can't get your head around the capacity of the engine versus the way it revs, can you?
No.
Particularly today, because large capacity engines are just Ferrari doing them, and then the very big hypercars with the V12s and stuff, isn't it?
Valkyrie engine was what's that?
6.5, isn't it?
Yeah, but everything else being turbocharged is 4 litres, isn't it? And anything over 4 litres, you sometimes raise an eyebrow and go, "Oh, that's a big engine, isn't it? It's 4.4." But for Ferrari still to be doing those big capacity, it's a very different driving experience as well, isn't it? Because you say it's just got that natural torque. It's not forced. It is just there. And it's
there's something magical about them, definitely. It's
have they always been magical? I don't think there's some of the cars the V12s have been fitted to haven't been quite so memorable, but the engines have always made.
No, I think we were going to. I mean, the first V12 Ferrari I ever drove was 456, and that was much more in the vein. Well, 550 was an extension of that. So
was that when it was new, or was that as a older
That's
car?
when it was new. And it was a manual, so it was a lovely thing, really cool thing. And it was special because it's first V12 Ferrari I'd ever driven. I'd driven a Mondial, I think, before that was the first Ferrari I ever drove. But the 456 was something really special because I'd never been in control of something that you could work through the gears or just drop it into sixth and it still would go. I think it pretty defines a kind of effortless performance.
It was a proper resurgence at that point, wasn't it? 456 and 550.
They were really
since Daytona. There hadn't really been anything to get sort of properly excited.
Yeah, I think that was
a V12.
Montezemolo was running things then, wasn't he? So they had 355 and 456, and then 550, and Schumacher was racing the Formula One team, and they were suddenly winning Grand Prix again, and they had enormous kind of momentum behind them. I think
456 was the first V12 I drove, but it was when you drove it 10 years ago. So I drove it as an older car, but it was a lovely example. But even the owner was like, "This isn't." He'd had it, I think, from new or very nearly new, because you can just see it. The car around the engine starts to wear out, but the engine never does. I'm sure there's obviously huge bills. You need to follow our colleague from Polestar, Graham Lambert's story of 456 ownership. There's always a bill not round the corner, but right in front of you. But the engine still defines the car.
If they were to reach a point where they couldn't have a V12, and we won't go down the EV conversation for a fourth podcast running, but assuming there's always the possibility to have some sort of combustion engine, but maybe it can't be a V12 anymore. Do you think that's? I wonder what effect that would have on Ferrari, because it's like a talisman, isn't it? It's
always been from the very start. The first engine
from the beginning.
The first engine was a V12.
They played this bit of Enzo Ferrari sitting there talking about the Dickie Cilindri, and sort of, I've said it the second time now.
Yeah.
Took a risk.
We'll check whether it's correct.
Exactly, please don't. But yeah, saying how integral it was, and it's just, you say, from the first car, that is the heart of
Because it
a
definitely
Ferrari,
separates them, doesn't it? And you know, no disrespect to McLaren, but everyone, you know, they go to Ricardo, say, to have their engines designed, and you know, they're very hugely impressive powertrains and very impressive cars to drive, but that's what separates some, you know, brand like Ferrari from everyone else, isn't it?
But it's like the Roma, isn't it? It's a wonderful car. I think it's one of their best looking cars, and it's a great GT, super GT, and it sells in big numbers because it's the car that is their first Ferrari, but it never gets considered in the same breath as a V12. If you want a front engine Ferrari, you can either afford a V12 or you can't. You don't have a Roma as a compromise, as a fallback. It's because it is just that halo car.
Well, even
every Ferrari's a halo car in their eyes, I'm getting, but it's.
But if everything's just readjusted, so the V6 was the new V8 and the V8 was the new V12, you still wouldn't have the same prestige, would you? Or, you know, we said about snob value and snobbery around, you know, European attitudes towards Japanese cars, but there's the same thing you can apply to to a V12 versus a V8, can't?
Yeah, because it seems with the Revuelto, I've murdered that pronunciation. But that's lost 2 cylinders, but it hasn't been part. That's not part of the story, is it?
Oh no, not Revuelto. The
Tiramisu.
I think we need to defer to Henry.
The Huracan replacement.
But they've dropped cylinder counts, but it hasn't been the headline. It hasn't been, oh right, well that's not the same again.
Because that was never the flagship, though, was
it?
it?
Was V10 to V8.
That's why.
But adding hybrid to everything for Lamborghini hasn't been a negative. It hasn't sort of made people
absolutely not.
Whereas I think if you asked if they were ever thought of putting the hybrid stuff on the V12, then that I think would be a big story. Oh, it's draw a line in the sand, then it's the next chapter for Ferrari. But with everyone else, it doesn't seem to be such a big thing. No. But for Ferrari, I think it would be, wouldn't it? It would just drop them down, as you say, in reach of others, and you've lost that big USP potentially.
I think so. I'm sure we'd still love a big, flagship Ferrari GT or Ferrari supercar.
Well, it's like the Lusso, isn't it? They offered it with a V12 and a V8, and everyone, even though the V12 is financially ruinous, it's the one that you'd want, isn't it?
I think so.
Visually, you need to be a Ferrari salesman to know the difference
the
between the
V12
two.
and the Purosangue, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't need a V12 at all. You could have stuck the turbocharged V8 in it.
Probably go better with the way they've softened that V12 off in the Purosangue. It doesn't quite have the oomph you might expect, but unless everything's in its most aggressive mode. But it's still something. It's still oh my god, it's one of those. And you open the bonnet to show your friends.
And if we collectively are terrified about unleashing all of the V12's performance, how do you think customers get on? Because they want the noise, don't they? They want the character.
Well, if the noise is now in a very narrow window, in a very specific set of circumstances, how does an owner get to appreciate it without going down the aftermarket route, which seems at odds, because that's the last thing Ferrari ever want, and are very hot on people modifying their cars. And
Well, maybe, if you can just liberate just a little bit more character from the engine, people will be quite happy with the car being slightly softer and more approachable. Just hope they can carry on for a bit longer.
yeah, I think they've, by the sounds of it and from what they've been, they've opened the e-factory, but that hasn't precluded them from developing their internal combustion engines at all, has it? And I think it goes back to, they've always said, if there is a market they can sell that V12 in, they will. Whether that, I think the
Whether that
next
includes
step,
us or
whether
or
it
their
includes
home
road
market.
cars, or whether it just becomes XX cars and track only cars, would be a very sad day, wouldn't it? Because I think people still, a V12 Ferrari is still a head turner, isn't it?
I think they're in a unique position though, aren't they? Actually, that they could sustain their business and justify continuing to develop those engines purely on the basis of their really special series cars or track only cars, which I can't think of any other brand that would be able to justify doing that, actually, whilst continuing with their series production stuff.
Yeah, they can still build. They've got that market sewn up, haven't they? Building those specials that, yes, there's a waiting list for every single one, and they've sold every single one, but it does allow them to also cherry pick bits off the production line. Really. So, okay, V12 road cars might be, sales won't be as big, but if you can build something like an SP3 that still utilises bits of other cars, and you create something special that makes...
You wonder what they could do if they were freed from the rules that they have to comply with for the 12-cylinder car or the 812 or whatever it was before. If they could just go out and build an engine like Cosworth has for the T50, or with everything they know about V12s and all their in-house expertise, and they're not having to build it to a price that a small, low-volume, independent manufacturer can make, and they can get 800 and whatever horsepower out of a street legal thing. That's quite an exciting thought, isn't it? What would they do without any constraints at all?
Well, maybe if the V12 road car does sadly die,
It'd be compensation of
give them-
sorts, wouldn't it?
that would give them the impetus just to make an engine for their track stuff.
Yeah, for the 399 you can build and keep wrapping it around. So
I think in terms of looks, we've just come back to road cars. So it's going to be all the launch cars, quite unusually, were in exactly the same spec. So they're all in, I think it was Giallo Monte Carlo. They're all yellow anyway. And
Didn't he
I
play
think
for
it's gonna
Chelsea?
be-
no, we signed him and sold him.
And I think it's going to be a very spec sensitive car, and actually seeing it in different colours could really change the visual appeal of it. So because it's got
a lot going on, hasn't it?
There's a lot.
Which is unusual for Ferrari. Normally they're very clean, aren't they? But that's got lots of different surfaces, different surface materials.
The overhead view, you don't really appreciate quite how, like the not even really C pillars, are they? But where a blade would be on a R8 or something, they've got those bits pointing forwards, haven't they? But in the plan view, it looks amazing.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see one on the road. Same with the Vanquish, actually. I think I've seen a Vanquish in a studio, and I think the proportions of those two cars together are going to be wild. It's going to be a great test.
It's going to be a great
do it,
test with that, isn't it? With those cars. And we didn't ask you what your first V12 Ferrari was, Henry.
Sorry, because I think it was probably 599, sort of driven not very far, sort of out of the back of the office.
Very
first
slow
one,
sandwich run.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Sort of just so I could say I'd driven it that old 612, Scaglietti possibly. First one. I mean, I remember F12 is the one that really sticks in my mind as actually having a really, really, really good drive in it and loving it, because that was my personal choice for car of the year that year. When it was a really good year, that, because we had SLS Black Series, and GT3 obviously won,
Obviously.
despite it being
Not
probably
there.
But yeah, F12 was
Yeah.
just.
Did it live up to your expectations, 599? Or was that one of those drives where you go, I just want to say I've driven one? I'm not expecting anything.
It wasn't quite like that, but it was. I just remember it feeling I remember it feeling big on the road, and that was one of the things I loved about when I sat in the F12. Even I think it sat in it at a motor show, must be in Geneva or something like that. And as soon as you sat in it, you thought, "Oh, this is good. This is a step forwards," because it just felt so much more. Wieldy,
visually
suppose.
they took the bulk out of it as well, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, it had that sort of
With the
chopped off
aero
back end
through the
wasn't it?
front
Yeah,
and the
very
rear.
cool.
Yeah, which is really
Very cool. What was yours, John? Without sort of having to go too far back into black and white.
Yeah, thanks. It was the 456, so it was a good place to start.
Yeah.
But the 550 was a proper sweet spot. Still is now. I've driven one.
Yeah,
a
they're
friend
good things.
owns one, doesn't he? And it's still,
Yeah.
it's still a complete car. It's still really enjoyable.
I think it's what I found with the kind of rewinding back to the Japanese stuff. But the thing I loved about the 22B is it doesn't date, because not all the things that were good when it was contemporary are as good or better now, because the gearbox isn't suddenly this feels rubbish, or it's always had a really nice gearbox, it's always had good suspension, it's had a character. Same with the 550. I think that gearbox was great. The look of the thing was really cool.
Yeah, the size of the car,
elegant and quite understated, and just
effective.
a really, really good road car. Not obsessed with lap times, or it's purely designed to be a brilliant road car.
But it's interesting. We'd almost all probably walk past a Testarossa or 512 to drive a V12 Ferrari rather than a flat 12 Ferrari.
I don't know.
Well, there's more V12s to choose from, cars. But that's when
F512M was great to drive. Weird to look at, but it was a brilliant thing to drive.
Very different cars, very different experiences.
Okay, well, we'll wrap this up with a question.
Oh no.
Here we go.
I always go into Dickie Meaden age 10.
No, I told you, Stu. It's a jammy Dodger with peanut butter on the top.
But crunchy, not smooth.
Yeah, absolutely.
You freak. So one JDM car.
Oh, bloody hell.
And one V12 Ferrari.
Well, I suppose
yeah.
It's got to be a 22B, hasn't it? I was talking for about 3 hours about them. So 22B and a 550, I think. Because I'd get all my sort of frantic driving around like a lunatic kicks in the Subaru, and then I can just enjoy myself in a different way in the 550, I think. That sounds wrong.
Yeah.
Still driving, obviously.
Henry, quick, think about that whole.
We've chosen 22B, so I can't. So I'll go the other way. I'll go Evo.
Which one though? There's only 77 to choose from.
Exactly. Yeah. It probably would have to be a Macklin, I think.
That is
much as I love the later ones, I think. Just the
Not an RS Sprint. Too many bad memories.
No, I've got all the bad memories of the RS.
Yeah, mine was an Evo 7 Extreme. So yeah, I'll go Macklin, and then if it's two-car garage, I'll go early Ferrari V12, then I'll go do something like a
250 GTO,
250.
something
250
modest like that.
I'll go short wheelbase because it's less on it. It's more unassuming, isn't it? So I'll do that. Yeah,
Nice.
Why not?
Well, it's not strictly JDM because that's domestic market, isn't it? But RB5 is still, I still find that as 247 horsepower, sweet spot for the car. Just the balance of power and grip and subtlety as well in terms of the way it looks. I don't know, 550 is, I've driven all of the modern V12s, and the 550 still stands out as being a very well-rounded, enjoyable package. So I'll probably go that way.
We have forgotten one great Japanese car. Well, we haven't forgotten it, but in this context, we have NSXR.
I was just about to say I was going to have NSXR and a 250 this, so go old school with the Ferrari. Get your kicks with a Type R and then just waft around.
Oh,
And
I
the
think
250
Stu's
this
he's probably got the best.
I don't know, but he's just he's heard whatever else.
Yeah.
It's like top trumps or
Yeah.
something, isn't it? He's just
It's
come
like
in.
knowing what cars you're going to play. But,
Nice.
yeah, nice collection. If someone would like to pay for those, that'd be fantastic. Or Steve, if I could borrow your Lusso, that'd be lovely. We'll wrap that one up. Dickie, John, thank you very much. And Henry, thank you for joining us. And hopefully you'll be back on another episode soon. So please don't forget to like, subscribe, tell everyone that we're here on your podcast platform. And we will see you next time. Thank you.